That's not anywhere near my era. Why is that the song that I think of when I think of technology? Hello super friends, and welcome back to another episode of Superhero Saturday, where we talk about the arts of superheroes, storytelling, and so much more. My name is Annie, and today we are talking about how to design a character with technology-based superpowers. There's a lot of ways to make this superpower really cool and creative, so let's go ahead and jump right in to get started. Now, I have a lot of ideas on the chopping block ready to go for Superhero Saturday, basically at all times, partly thanks to a lot of your comments. And this video is actually one of those because someone commented this idea and I couldn't get it out of my head. Partly because it's such a weird superpower to think about when you start digging in, and because one of my original superhero characters, Super Annie, has technology-based powers. If you want to check out the somewhat cringy history of this channel and see some funny superhero sketches, then those are linked below and in the places you can check those out. But be forewarned, the cringe factor might be a little high. Anyway, the first thing that we have to do whenever we start figuring out what kind of superpower we want our character to have is to first define what the power itself is. When we're talking about technology-based powers, the most prominent one is what I think a lot of people call technopathy, which is the manipulation of technological devices at will. And not in the way that you usually think, by clicking with the mouse and typing on the keyboard. Like with your mind. Some quick disclaimers here before we get really started. If you're looking to make a cyborg character, we will talk about that just briefly later on in this video, but if you're thinking more along the lines of AI or an android or something that is entirely technological based and not biological based, then that's going to probably fall into the category more of a different video. So we'll tackle some of that in the future. For now, we're going to talk about my main issue with this superpower, which is, of course, the technology itself. Because you've got to consider the fact that you're asking a biological being like myself to interact with something that is entirely tech-based. Basically an object, something that's designed to, just do something automatically based on input. To do something that it's not normally able to do on its own. So that's all sorts of levels of disconnect here that make this a really interesting and kind of a weird superpower. Just gonna say it again. And the first logical question we have to ask ourselves when creating characters with this type of superpowers is, what do we define as technology? Are all machines technology, or is it just the ones that are powered by electricity or programmed with code or designed for some kind of automatic computing? Because if we're just talking about computers themselves, then computing devices have been around for a long time and they don't look like what we think of computers today. So for example, does an abacus count as a computing machine? Now, I know this is getting pretty in-depth for a silly, family-friendly channel about superheroes, but bear with me here. Diving into this kind of depth can really bring out a whole bunch of creative opportunity when you're designing your own characters and creating your own version of this superpower. To put it simply, all I'm asking is this: what kind of technology can your character manipulate with their mind? For simplicity's sake, let's take the colloquial modern version of the word technology to mean a machine that runs on electricity to perform tasks automatically. This could be as simple as a light bulb, as prolific as a smartphone, or as complex as a nuclear fusion machine. By nature, this technology really only does what it's pre-programmed to do. It doesn't really have the option to go outside of whatever code it's using. As much as we think they go off the rails, the technology can't just do things that are outside its pre-programmed parameters. For example, you can't tell your webcam to write your English essay for you any more than you can tell a hammer to paint a portrait of you. Like, you could probably do it with a bunch of help and added parameters and your own input, but it really is not going to be that technology itself doing those things. It's going to be you supplementing the gaps in its abilities. So if your character has the ability to tell tech what to do, then you should take some time to consider to what extent your character can tell the technology to do. Can they tell the technology to do something within the pre-programmed parameters of that piece of equipment? Like, for example, could you tell a computer to pull up a browser, navigate to YouTube, and subscribe to the Superhero Saturday YouTube channel? Can they tell it to do something to extend its pre-programmed parameters? Like make a TV fly over to your friend's house and show them the latest Superhero Saturday video? Or can they tell it to disassemble and reassemble its parts into something that isn't within its parameters at all? Like turn itself into a content writing AI that can write, edit, film, star in, and post and produce a Superhero Saturday video for me. These are all options that you can choose from as the creator of this character. All you have to do now is decide. Next, let's talk about the power source, which is something that we do on all of these superpower videos. Technopathy, by your character's definition, can be caused by any of your normal superpower starters. Science experiment gone wrong, genetic predisposition, magical or supernatural influence, etc., etc. I find that a lot of people tend to use a time-traveling, technology-powered computer entity as their starter for something like this. So you can take that design and tweak it for your own endeavors, or, you know, work off of that and riff on it until you find something you like. And since technopathy itself means using the mind to control technological objects outside of the character, then the power source for this is typically just the biological character themselves. Or for example, Super Annie. Pretty simple, actually, unless you want to change that around and make it more complicated. Again, it's all up to you. Now that we've got your character's powers all defined and sourced, the next thing we want to talk about is their upper and lower limits. For example, their absolute strengths, their like beast mode level of powers, and their weaknesses or the things that prevent them from using their powers. This set of questions also kind of follows the typical superpower kind of critical thinking time or brainstorming time. So ask yourself a few really critical questions. What is the most powerful thing that your character can do with their powers, and what does it cost them? What is a typical obstacle for your character using their powers, and how do they get around that? How do they apply their superpowers to the plot, or to their motivations, or to their goals? Whether they're a supervillain trying to take over the world, or a superhero trying to save it. Do they have a specific physical range at which their powers work? Like, for example, do they have to actually be touching the piece of technology, the device or whatever it is? Or do they have like a 33-foot Bluetooth style range? Or is it, you know, limitless as long as they've got a strong enough internet connection? Do they have to recharge their powers once they use them for a long time, or like reboot their brains or something? Or is your character designed to interact with technology that's already outdated and all of these newfangled TikTok-y looking things are just kind of like out of their comfort zone? Think about your character using their powers at the ultimate level and then also at their lowest breaking point. That'll give you a good set of parameters to kind of figure out where they work in at their normal operating status. Next, we're going to take a look at some of the potential side effects you should consider when building onto these powers. And I'm not just talking about weaknesses. If your character is living in a modern world that looks a lot like our own, they're probably surrounded by all kinds of technology all the time. Is that a good or a bad thing for your character? If, for example, your character communicates with technology kind of like a telepath communicates with a crowd full of people and they just can't turn it off, it's just always sound coming at their brain, then what does that look like for your character? Does it sound like a dial-up tone, like constantly in their head when a computer's updating in the other room? What does it look like for your character to be able to bend any technology to their will at a whim? This could be great, for example, for a character who is maybe a bit of a criminal and can just turn security cams and alarm systems on and off before and after their heist. Or maybe your character just, like Wall-E style, never leaves their couch and they just make the technology do everything for them. What does having this kind of communication look like in their day-to-day life? I feel like this is something that really is just kind of unmined territory when it comes to technopathy stories. They might use it in connection with their own personal lives, the relationships they have with other human beings. If you want to go in kind of a more typical direction, do they find humans to be tricky, illogical, and maybe even untrustworthy? Or do they use technology to manipulate their relationships to their advantage, like hacking into their significant other's smartphone and they don't even realize it? Ugh. There seem to be a lot of really negative applications for this power. No wonder why so many supervillains use it. For our last segment, I want to talk about some of the special elements that are specific to technopathy itself. The first thing is that you may want to consider what other superpowers might need to be added to your character's arsenal in order for them to operate at the level that you really want them to. For example, my character Super Annie has technopathy, but she also has a little bit of electromagnetism, which is super useful when she wants to, for example, power on or power off a device without having to plug in, or manipulate some of the metals and things that are sensitive to magnetism. There's also the intensely intellectual element of technology that we need to consider. If your character deals a lot with manipulating the coding of a piece of technology itself, then it might be really important for them to understand how coding works so that they can use it and leverage that knowledge to manipulate and even grow their powers. They might also just be a technical genius, or maybe they went to school and really studied hard all of the different intricacies that go into information technology so that they could have a leg up over, for example, other technopaths. If they can actually understand the language of technology, then maybe they can better speak and command those technological devices to do what they tell them. The last thing I want to throw at you guys is the idea of cyborgs, or biological beings who have augmented technological assistance. If you're thinking of designing a cyborg character, I highly recommend that you answer all the questions that we've already addressed in this video and study prosthesis and other medical assistance devices that are already in use today. On the most basic level, a cyborg and an amputee with a really cool robot arm are basically kind of the same thing. So if you take the time to study what it means to have a prosthetic limb or something like that, you're going to end up creating a character that is much more comprehensive and perhaps even more creative than you could have without it. Just take the time to think about how technology and prosthesis overlap and then apply that and expand on that when you're designing your character. Speaking of which, the final point in this video and in all of my superpower tutorial videos is to add your creativity in here. I can't possibly cover all of the different areas in which you might decide to take your technopathy. That is up to you as the creator, as the artist. Take a look at other technology-based super characters in different universes, study how they work and how the story progresses around them, and then apply some of those concepts to your own characters and see how you can tweak them and make them your own. Maybe your character is a cyborg technopath genius who is actually a really big softie and is a huge people person. That's something that isn't actually done too often. Maybe your character also has the ability to manipulate metals, and that enables them to create machines that nobody would have ever imagined possible before. Maybe your character also has magic powers that they use to infuse technology with like spells and stuff in some kind of weird sci-fi fantasy superhero mashup. There's just no limit when it comes to how you can create a story that's just as unique as you are. I really hope this video was helpful, you guys, or you at least enjoyed watching me ramble on about technopathy for so long. In the comments, if you want to go ahead and put down what your favorite characters are in the superhero verse that have technology-based superpowers, or if you're working on a character that has technopathy of some kind in their arsenal. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give us a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more superhero content like this in the future. Thanks again for watching, Super Friends, and we'll see you next time.